In general in life, I don't consider myself to be a particularly courageous person. As a teenager, I once chased a shoplifter out of the bookshop I worked in, but other than that, I don't really have any big acts of bravery to my credit. But very early on in my leadership journey, I discovered that courage in leadership is quite different from courage in the rest of your life. Specifically, I found as a very young tech lead that although I was frankly terrified of my rather psychotic boss and wouldn't say boo to him ordinarily, when he did something that I felt was threatening my team, I suddenly found I could stand up to him, tell him what I thought without really feeling any fear. In this video, I want to talk about what it means to have courage as a leader and why it's such an important aspect of leadership. First of all, what does leadership courage look like? It comes in many forms. I've briefly described one already, a willingness to stand up for the people you're responsible for. Another very necessary form of courage for leaders is a willingness to have difficult conversations. Sometimes this is about giving someone feedback or bad news, but it can really be any kind of conversation that you find awkward or difficult or painful. The kind of conversation you definitely would not have if you didn't need to do it as part of your job. Another form of leadership courage manifests in a refusal to give in, a refusal to allow yourself to surrender to stress, to overwhelm, to panic, and to external pressures. This doesn't mean acting like you're always right. That's not courageous, but it means not dropping an opportunity at the first hurdle. It means supporting someone in your team who's struggling, even though you're not really sure that they're ever going to be able to get to the level they need to be at. And it means being optimistic, though not too optimistic, in the face of people telling you your project is doomed or isn't worth it. What this is really about is integrity and values. To be the best leader you can be, you need to have the courage and the integrity to stand up for your values, to do what you believe is right, even when that's going against the grain and when others are telling you that you're wrong. And that leads us to what it is about leadership that makes courage so important. The need to take risks. Every example I've given so far is an example of taking a risk. Risking speaking up to your boss who might yell at you or even fire you. Risking having a tough conversation that might be unbearable or lead to some unknown consequences. Risking starting a project that might fail. Risk-taking can be dangerous by definition, of course, and you don't want to take it too far relative to the normal level of risk aversion in the environment you work in. But leaders who take no risks at all aren't really leaders, if you ask me. I'm going to say that again. If you don't take any risks, you're not a leader. If you take no risks, it means you only operate on the basis of total certainty. And if that's the case, then your team could just as well do that without you. They don't need you. The reason they do need you, in fact, is because they need you to be brave enough to make tough decisions, to take risks on a daily basis. And not only that, but remember that as a leader, you are a role model, both for the people you lead and others in your vicinity. The better you are at modeling the right ways to take risks, the better your team will become at it too. Probably you should be more willing to take risks than your team, but you likely want your team to feel empowered to take some risks. All of this is caveated with a reminder that this all depends on the exact environment you work in. Obviously, if you work in a factory where safety is paramount, you probably can't take the same level of risks as you can if you work for a game developer, for example. A really good example of modeling risk-taking and modeling courage is in showing humility. Leaders that pretend to be impervious, who pretend that they never make mistakes, that they never fail at anything, obviously lack humility, but I'd also say they lack courage. It takes courage to say to your team, listen, here's how I messed up. But if you don't do that, you're condemning your team to make the same mistakes you've made. And actually goes deeper than that. If you don't have the courage to admit your mistakes to yourself, you'll never learn from them either. One of the hardest forms of courage for many new leaders is the courage that's needed to make a tough decision and then stand by it. And in particular, communicate it to people that might not like it. For example, I found that one of the hardest decisions for many leaders is to kill a project. They don't want to do this because it means admitting defeat, but they also don't want to let the team down. They don't want to have to explain to the team why they've made this decision. And if you think about it, just on the basis of what's going to happen today, then that kind of makes sense. You're going to avoid having a tough conversation and upsetting your team. But if you think about the long term, it's often easy to see the right decision. It'll be painful today, and maybe it'll be painful for weeks or even months to come, but it will be best overall in the long term, as long as you believe that. One of the best learning experiences I've had in my career was a disastrous project from my early days at Google. If you want to hear about what went wrong and what happened when I overcame my fear of admitting to the mistakes I'd made, check out the video that's on screen now. And if you have your own examples of courage or a lack of it in leadership, please do share them in the comments. I'd really like to see them. Bye. See you soon.